Hello, my fellow rhythm rebels. Today we take a wild ride on this Radical Rhythm podcast as we once again interview Vi Johnson, the director of the Carter Johnson Leather Library and Collection. What a lot of people don't know about Vi is she is also the fascinating mind and author behind Dhampir, Child of the Blood. I've always been fascinated with how lesbians have been featured in the movies as both vampires and vixens. Well, stay tuned for an unforgettable journey into the unexpected as Vi talks about vampirism. Welcome to the Radical Rhythm Podcast. Today we have Vi Johnson from the Carter Johnson Leather Library and Collection, who some people don't know is an author as well as a director of a library. And oh my goodness, so much more. Vi, thank you so much for being here once again. Actually, this is your place. Well, thank you once again for appearing on the Radical Rhythm podcast.
I just came over to your house.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. We're at the center in Evansville, Indiana. And I would like to talk about one of your two books.
Okay.
Let's talk about, and correct my pronunciation, Dhampir. Dhampir.
Child of the Blood.
Child of the Blood. When was that written? Published.
When was it published?
Yeah.
93?
93? Okay. So you're in Oklahoma at that time.
Yeah.
Okay. And well, let's first tell the audience what the book is about.
If we're going to be technical, the book is about my Dhampir.
What is your fear of doms?
Oh, I don't have a fear of doms.
Then what is Dhampir?
The word Dhampir means vampire's child.
Okay. Are you a vampire's child?
I was to my sire, yes. But the book is about my Dhampir.
Your Dhampir. Tell us what the basic premise or storyline of the book is.
Oh, you got to narrow that down.
I know. I read the book, but a very long time ago.
You want the backstory or just the book?
Well, let's start with the book and go with backstory. Or we got to do the backstory first?
The book is a published version with some additions of the birthday present for my Dhampir, with the exception of some artwork that was done by Molly Devon, a glossary, because some of the terms are pretty damned archaic, and the foreword, which my Dhampir wrote. That is the way the book was given to her on her first birthday in the sanguine community.
What does sanguine mean?
Blood.
The blood community. Now, is this a countercultural subculture of kink?
It could be argued that vampirism is an extreme blood fetish.
Okay, so a fetish isn't necessarily leather, but
Correct.
a fetish is kinky.
Can be.
And are there individuals who participate in vampire culture who are not into the blood portion of it? Or is that counterintuitive?
Into the blood portion from which side? From giving or receiving?
Giving.
That would be the vampire is the one who's getting.
Right. And the one who's giving is
A vessel.
a vessel. And the vessel may not be kinky or might be kinky.
Correct.
Right? So tell me, how did you find this lifestyle?
Once upon a time when dinosaurs roamed the earth and, God was a very young child, one of the many people who was around my household was a man named Alan. And aside from the fact that Alan had some amazing talents, Alan was a vampire. And he was a very good friend of my mother's. Hearing vampire creation stories was something that put me to sleep whenever he was visiting, because he would usually tell me a bedtime story. Um, uh, 10, 12 years later, when I was old enough to give consent, he said, "So, would you like to be my child?" Now, Alan was the only real male father figure I knew. He was kind of like, he was like an uncle.
How do you know Alan?
He was a friend of my mom's. Remember what I had told you about people coming and going in the house all the time? Artists, writers, singers, musicians. Now, my mother, being the oddest child in the family and the oldest, had some pretty eclectic friends. Friends in the spiritual community, friends in what by today's definition would be considered the magic community. Alan was one of them. He was an amazing man. He was also a butterfly collector, but...
Okay. So, he asked you if you wanted to be his child, and how old were you when this was introduced?
Not quite 17.
Okay.
It was May. I was probably 4 weeks from my 18th birthday.
Okay. And what kind of response do you give an invitation like that?
Well, not being sure of what that exactly meant. I thought it was some sort of exotic, some sort of adoption or something he and my mom had worked out, or, my first response was, sure.
Because he was a trusted member of the family.
Yeah.
And you decided yes, and then what happened?
Then what happened? Then an amazing ritual happened. If as a kid you've ever done like the "I want to be your blood sister" thing, and the two of you make a cut and you put your blood together, and it was something very similar. Rather personal. No, not sexual in that sense. Rather personal. And Alan's blood was introduced to my system, my body. And it started.
And what does the transformation entail? What happens?
On the intellectual side, you learn more about vampire culture, both the mythos and the reality of vampire families, clans, if you were, great clans, houses, long claimed lineages, and so on. Physically, it was an interesting transformation. Over the course of about a year, my sense of smell got better. My hearing was never the best. It got a little better, but my sense of smell and my sense of taste both became far more acute. And this is going to sound awful. I began to look at an awful lot of my friends kind of the same way you look at a really nice hamburger.
I had visions of meat, and that's...
Yeah.
Okay.
Especially for about the first year. Let's just say my hungers changed.
And were the hungers sexual in any way?
Some were.
Okay.
They got a little wilder. I got a tad bit more primal. A whole lot beastier. Love making, especially with the man that I was betrothed to marry. got a whole lot wilder.
Okay.
And usually an awful lot rougher until one day I realized I was kind of out of control because I put 60 some odd stitches across his chest.
Ooh. Ooh.
He bragged about it until the day he died. No, I didn't kill him.
Okay. Oh, wow. Okay. And most folks that I know that have either dabbled with vampirism or actually decided to live it as a lifestyle don't talk about it.
True.
So why a book?
What had happened was, within the family line that I'm a part of, a child, if you have what is called a golden circle, which means you've chosen a vampiric mate and you have created a child. The child is responsible to its parents for its behavior for a year and a day. At the 366th day, that Dhampir is an adult within the vampire community. But for the children of Lilith, there's an extra step in there. The child must hear the law of the clan and recite it back so that it can never be said the child did not know the law. And for my Dhampir's birthday, I wanted it to be something special. I took every letter that I had written her, every entry in my own journal that I had ever made about her, and a lot of entries in my journal about my own blood hungers. Put them all into a book that included the law. From that little book, I read the law to her, turned it around, and she had to read it back to me and the few other guests that were there that night. And the book was a gift to her. There was one copy. One. A year, maybe a year and a half later, I was at Dressing for Pleasure, actually. I think like 94, 93, 92, somewhere in there. And a mountain with a beard approached me, and we were talking very briefly. He didn't introduce himself, actually. He said he had read everything I had ever written, and about this vampire thing, can we publish it? I backed up a couple of steps. I said, why don't we start this conversation basically over? He did introduce himself. His name was Philip Miller, of the Philip Miller Molly Devon combination that wrote Screw the Roses, Send Me the Thorns. And he pretty much proved that he had read everything I had ever written, because he was talking about something from a magazine called Black Leather and Color that probably had a circulation of about 500, so it was fairly obscure. And he said, now about this vampire thing, can we publish it? I was actually kind of startled at the question and deflected simply by saying, that was a gift to my daughter. You're going to have to ask her. Much to my surprise, she said yes. Okay, that put me on the hook. She wrote the intro. Some sketches were added that Molly did. Philip and Molly added a glossary. One of my vessels, a wonderful woman named Andrea, designed the cover. And the next thing I knew, it was out in the world.
All right. Now, before that time, were there any pictures of you with fangs out and about?
Most of the world knows me that way. I have since had my teeth filed more times than I really care to discuss, but that's a whole different conversation.
And was it the aesthetic, or was it a useful tool, having the sharp?
A vampire's fangs are a tool. No two vampires bite alike. A bite is a kind of signature. And we're pretty much known within the world of vessels by our bite.
Okay. And so you said there is a backstory, or did you tell me the backstory to the book?
Part of it. Her nickname was Cub. became fascinated with blood very early on in our leather relationship, and wanted to know more and more and more about the fetish of blood, blood drinking. What does it mean? Um, God, I can't even think of other ways to describe it. What does it mean? What's it like? What does it feel like? Um, she asked questions, I told her stories.
Mm-hmm.
Until she asked me the question Alan had asked me. May I be your child? The answer was yes.
Wow. It's, you know, vampires have been portrayed so many different ways in the media, in movies, as the bad guy, as the romantic. But it seems that society has a love affair with the concept of vampirism. No? Or are they scary?
I think it's an extension of the bad, usually it's bad boy fetish.
Okay, okay. So, chasing a vampire for a relationship or some kind of interaction of what is like chasing the bad boy in high school?
Kinda. Or at least that's the way it's portrayed.
Well, it seems that the vampires have quite a few fans in every like subculture. I mean, a subculture meaning like whether it's the club scene or it's like the goth scene or the kink or leather scene.
Even role play.
Role
The
playing.
Masquerade is the role playing game. The Masquerade is part of the vampire culture.
Okay, so we have, you know, in this podcast, I interview women who march to the beat of a different drum, and being a vampire, I would think, is marching to the beat of a different drum. However, how common is this? Is it a different drum? Is it a different lifestyle?
Is it a different culture? Yes. Is it a different lifestyle? No, it's an extension of the one that we're all a part of. Is it a tad bit more intimate? Yes.
So here we are, and I've known you, I just going on 20 years, I think now.
Probably a little bit more.
Wow, wow, okay. We're both,
About that old.
yeah, I didn't want to say it that way.
But I met you when you were a puppy.
I know, and still want to be a puppy, but I'm getting to be the old dog. So, where are you now with this? You know, are you still a vampire? Are you once a vampire, always a vampire? Or do you participate in the subculture?
Consider, if you consider vampirism a blood fetish,
Mm-hmm.
I have chosen to take a virus into my system, and once it's there, it's there. Do your needs change as you get older? Yes. Am I as hungry as I was when I was a child? No. Uh, do I still feast? Yes. Are there things about me that are a little bit different? Yes. Um, Even at my age, my pheromones are stronger, which is part of that whole allure thing. Um, Part
Is
of
that
it.
why all the young girls kiss you and not me?
Sorry, Toni.
Yeah, I knew there was a
I,
reason.
I really prefer to think of it as a grandmotherly thing.
Okay.
And they're just, kissing their grandmama on the cheek.
Mm-hmm.
When I am hungry, my pheromones roam. And they're easier to feel and smell than they are with the average person.
Okay.
Not a big deal.
All right. Well, Vi, I really appreciate you sharing this information. Have you ever been interviewed about this before?
Once, it made the interviewer blush.
Oh.
That's why I tend to be very careful about what I say.
Okay.
Is vampirism sexy and sexual? It is for the vessel. For me, it's kind of like eating a ham sandwich. I can't help the fact that my ham sandwich happens to be having an orgasm.
I think that's a great place to leave this podcast. I don't know about you, but Vi, once again, thank you so much for appearing on this podcast with me. I think we've just left everyone confused, and I'm really happy. Can they still buy the book, Dhampir?
Yes, it still shows up in a lot of gaming houses. Some of what's in the book is actually used as canon with some of the vampire games, and I tried very hard not to make you blush because I did not want to get into the sexual side of vampirism.
Well, I appreciate that, Vi. Thank you so much on so many levels. And thank you all for listening to our podcast this week. As you know, Vi Johnson appears and reappears because the Carter Johnson Leather Library and Collection is just a treasure trove of information. And as I described Vi as a walking encyclopedia of kink, leather, and maybe you didn't know, vampirism.